Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Succeed with eSIM, Essential Ingredients for MNOs and MVNOs. My name is John King. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Kaleido Intelligence. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, where we're taking on, I guess, one of the hottest topics that from Kaleido's side we see in the industry, really, I guess, providing a lot of potential opportunity for MVNOs and MNOs as demand and adoption for eSIM continues to, explode around the world. As always with these webinars, there is a host of new insight and discussion we have planned over the next 45 minutes. We really look forward to getting your inputs for this as well, and we'll share some details about how you can contribute as we go along. As with all webinars we do here at Kaleido, it's never just us talking. We love to get some different voices from the industry involved as well. So in a minute, we'll go through the agenda of what we'll cover today. But firstly, it's my pleasure to introduce the different speakers that we'll have with us today. So as you can see on the screen, we have Mert Duran from Giesecke+Devrient, we have Gary Waite from NetLync, and we have Stefan Sorrell, also from Kaleido Intelligence. So, gentlemen, it's fantastic to have all of you with us today. It'd be great if you could just quickly unmute yourselves and give a quick introduction to your roles within your respective companies. If we follow how it is on the screen, Mert, let's start with yourself, and then I'll let you pass it on to Gary, and then likewise to Stefan.
Thank you, John. So yes, I am indeed a senior product manager with Giesecke+Devrient, and I'm responsible for eSIM solutions, including Entitlements server. I have a 20-year background in mobile telecoms, having spent nearly 15 of those at 3 different mobile operators across 3 different regions, building and providing products to a combined total of about 55 million subscribers. But for the last 6 years, I've been working with SaaS telecom solutions that help mobile operators provide a great user experience to their subscribers.
Cheers, Mert. So I'm Gary Waite. My career has almost exclusively been around the physical SIM card and now eSIM technology. And I've been heavily involved. I was heavily involved in the standardization of the original physical SIM card, which was a long time ago. And I also managed the delivery of the GSMA consumer eSIM technical specification, which of course is now a global standard. But I also worked for Telefonica Group, one of the large carriers, for over a decade. And so I understand well the challenges that MNOs and MVNOs face, today as they work through their digital transformation. Stefan?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. It's great to be in such a distinguished company. So hello, everyone. I'm Stefan Sorrell. I'm one of the founders of Kaleido Intelligence. I've been in the telecom research game for going over a decade now, covering things like IoT to a great extent, but in the last few years as well, really looking very deeply into the ecosystem for eSIM across consumer and IoT devices. So my responsibility is really heading up the connectivity side and how that opens up opportunities for ecosystem actors.
Perfect. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm sure I'm not alone in really looking forward to everything you have to contribute to this webinar over the next 45 minutes or so. And on that note, let us move on to look at the agenda of what we're looking at today. And as we said, the whole theme of today is really looking at, for MNOs and MVNOs, how can I succeed with my consumer eSIM strategy? Now at Kaleido, there's a lot that we cover on this topic. I think there's something over 1,000 different companies that input to our research that we do year-round onto this topic. It's one of our specialty areas. And so with all webinars, what we like to do at the outset is really set the scene. So as you can see, when we're looking at the background and the outlook, we'll hand over to Stefan. And Stefan's going to share some of the latest insights from the market data that we track. Obviously, we cover other areas such as looking at different use cases, specification development, regulatory challenges, deployment hurdles, etc. So over the first 10 minutes or so, we'll be sharing these insights really to set the scene on how we see things from our point of view. And I think that should feed very nicely into then what we'll receive from Gary and then from Mert. And of course, these guys working with companies out on the ground, really they're going to be sharing a lot more just about, okay, if we're looking at our eSIM strategy, what should that look like? How should we do it? How can we make sure we're enabling and implementing eSIM properly to aid companies' digital transformation journeys? Okay? So we'll hand over to Gary and then follow through to Mert after Stefan's presented. And then as you can see, at the end, we'll also have a time to come together and take any questions from yourselves, the audience. Now that's the bit where we want to hear from you. And to do this, we want you to do it through the chat feature. So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see that lovely chat icon. If you could just put all your questions in there. We always ask you, please, to send it either to everybody, that's absolutely fine, or to all panelists, however you like to do it. And then what we shall do is towards the end of the session, as long as there's time permitting, we'll take as many of those questions as we can. Any questions that we're never able to cover live, we'll then follow up on with you with after this session. And of course, it goes without saying, everything that we cover today and present to you will be available to you. The deck that we present today will come to you shortly after this session, and the recording, of course, will come in due course as well. Right, I think that's all the preparation points covered. So let's crack on with the first stage, and I have the pleasure of handing over to Stefan to share the latest insights we see from Kaleido. Over to you, Stefan.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think let's take a little bit of time just to look into the background of eSIM, how things are developing, how we see the outlook overall in the ecosystem emerging to really cement eSIM's position as a replacement of the traditional physical SIM. I mean, as an analyst house, we have the obligatory forecast, historical and forecast data points there for how we see eSIM or even iSIM being enabled in smartphones. Now, see that from, if you look at the left-hand side there, I've highlighted three specific what we see as milestones in the market. Obviously, there were a couple of devices out on the market 2017, but really the Kickstarter for eSIM in smartphone was, of course, the enablement and support for eSIM in iPhone during 2018. Since then, there's quite a few more devices. I mean, I've included a chart here to the right-hand side where you can see, how many different launches there were of eSIM-enabled smartphones between 2017 and 2023. And you could really see, 2023 had a significant ramp up. And actually, for those of you who saw the infographic accompanying this, the promo for this webinar, Q1 actually saw the highest number of announcements for eSIM smartphones ever so far. So we've got an exciting time ahead of us. And if you have a look in the middle where I've highlighted 2025 there, we're starting to see a ramp up of mid-tier devices on the market. Initially, eSIM growth, highly concentrated around premium type of devices. We're now seeing the technology filter down to the more cost-effective side of the market. And that's really going to provide a significant boost, in our opinion, into how those numbers look for available or installed base of eSIM-enabled devices on the market. I think what we're also envisioning is that around 2027 or so, we'll start to see either iSIM or eSIM. iSIM, of course, is the integrated variant of GSMA's eSIM, really becoming a de facto part of device designs. When initial launches took place, it was really an accompaniment to, or an alternative there within the device to the physical SIM that could be swapped out. We're going to see that change. And yeah, hopefully by 2027 or so, we'll start to see, most devices becoming eSIM first, which will really cement eSIM within the marketplace. So really by 2028, we're going to be closing in on about 4 billion smartphones on the market that support eSIM technology, up from virtually none back in 2017. So really swift take up of the technology. So let's move on to the next slide, please, John. Of course, eSIM does not, or is not, without some barriers on the marketplace, but there have been some developments. Now, one of those things to look at, of course, is the regulatory side. Obviously, China is top. It's a huge market for device shipments, a huge market from a population basis and smartphone penetration. Unfortunately, the Chinese market is not quite ready yet to support eSIM. So the Ministry of Information Technology, the MIT, has not yet ratified the GSMA's eSIM specification. There is work being done in that direction. But let's say I've been having these conversations about when it will be ratified for some years. There are some issues, for example, around certification and encryption that perhaps the MIT wants to be more in control of. However, we do see light at the end of the tunnel. So perhaps within the next year or two, we'll start seeing some eSIM-enabled smartphone devices within the Chinese market. And of course, that will dramatically ramp up the overall installed base of compatible devices on the market. Another one to look at is South Korea. So, you know, when you had the initial iPhone on the market, eSIM was not really supported. However, we have seen regulatory approval being granted for smartphone use in the interim. That happened at the end of 2021, with devices beginning to be sold from September 2022. So some encouraging signs there. Meanwhile, in Japan, the regulator actually took quite an aggressive route to enabling eSIM, in that it demanded the incumbent MNOs open up eSIM services to consumers, as well as their infrastructure to light MVNO players. Now that really opens up competition in the market, because incumbent MNOs are not necessarily totally in control of eSIM distribution there. You have perhaps specialist players, such as those involved on the market for tourists or other sectors of the population, to be able to utilize eSIM and offer it to consumers on a more seamless basis. Meanwhile, in Russia is perhaps a little similar to the Chinese market. It's available to an extent to consumers. However, from what we've seen, there's rather a convoluted process quite often in terms of KYC, so know your customer processes. So obviously, when you buy a physical SIM, it's a fairly simple process to present some identification. When you move to digital channels, that's a little more tricky, and that's something that still has to be rationalized or standardized across the marketplace there. That said, you know, overall, we're seeing some pretty encouraging signs from a regulatory instance that will help boost the market along. If we move to the next slide, please, John. Another factor that's really taking hold of the market is the fact that you know, you might see eSIM as a domestic play, but actually what we're seeing more and more is that it's a solution for both home and abroad. That is to say, if you cast your mind back a few years, or indeed travel today into any airport, you'll often see a physical shop there selling some travel SIMs that, or some local SIMs for travelers to help reduce their roaming costs. What we're seeing now is almost an explosion of different types of players offering travel eSIM solutions to global travelers. So to a large extent, this is app-based, where you can either scan a QR code or download via an app for various countries and take advantage of normally lower cost connectivity for when you go on holiday. And actually, we conducted a large survey on this last year. You can see some data here on that in this particular figure. We've also just in the process of concluding an update to that particular survey now. But you can see, from our predictions last year, actually, over 500 million trips we project will be made. So travel trips for leisure or business purposes by 2020 will be made using travel eSIM packages as opposed to traditional roaming solutions. And the key driver behind that, as we found from the survey last year, was cost. Mainly because once you go outside an operator's primary footprint, you often end up with some absurd charges. For example, if I go to Canada on my mobile operator, they tried to charge me £6 per megabyte. For me, that's instantly travel eSIM. What's interesting as well, though, is that there are other factors that come into play. So, things like ease of use, ease of onboarding were mentioned as key drivers behind utilization of the technology. What does that mean in practice? Well, you want everything to be e-commerce, for example. And of course, finally, it's important to mention that actually the technology and the experience is quite sticky. So 90% of those who've already used the travel eSIM, would actually use such a service again. So domestic as well as international plays there for eSIM in smartphones. So quite important steps being taken to expand the market. If we move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the eSIM ecosystem. So on the left-hand side there, we can see perhaps, where are we now, or what do we need now, and how do we get there? So on the left-hand side, you'll notice a QR code. For example, I recently got a new business line for my smartphone. What happened? I was sent a QR code in the post. I don't like that. I want to get my eSIM on a much more seamless basis. So for that, I need a eSIM delivered through perhaps a carrier application. Really, to achieve that, we need ecosystem steps such as enhancement of the sales channel to bring e-commerce into the experience. Things like migration to digital BSS away from legacy ones, which are not set up for digital onboarding. Integration into existing systems as well. I talked a bit about KYC for the Russian market. eKYC is clearly an important factor in enabling that. Meanwhile, when you think of eSIM as a digital process first, you want reliability. You want a trouble-free experience for both the eSIM as well and the services surrounding that. So on the back end there, you need a solution provider who's going to determine whether there are interoperable profiles for your specific device. Is the solution, for example, able to dynamically alter and adjust that profile according to your device's specifications to make it work? And of course, as we're going to see later, is there an entitlement solution in place? Can that ensure that services are working properly as you would expect? And finally, I think, and this is really another crucial part of cementing eSIM's place, is how do we see technology moving forward to support eSIM for the duration of its life cycle? So within the specification set now, and finally within the ecosystem, we're seeing things like device transfer emerging. So if I swap over my phone after a couple of years, I can just seamlessly swap the eSIM that's inside, profile that's inside it, to my new device. That's been a real sticking point in the past. That's now being addressed. Additionally, things like multiple enabled profiles. So for those of you who know about dual SIM phones, basically using the same kind of principle, but for eSIM. Now that's something that Apple has already managed to get a hold of. In the Android ecosystem, that's still something that needs to be worked on and developed beyond a specific set of devices there. So some key things that still need to be developed, but we are making steps there. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to you, John. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think that's a really nice introduction of, like you say, where we are at the moment with those numbers that you shared earlier on, and looking at those different use cases and challenges that the industry needs to address as well moving forward. If you have joined us, by the way, I'd say a few minutes late, not to worry. What you've missed so far is us as Kaleido giving an update to the market, the eSIM market, and where we are at the moment. And we'll be moving on momentarily to then look at how MNOs and MVNOs specifically, what steps they should be taking to successfully implement their eSIM strategies. Of course, it's good to see a question coming through, which we'll get to later on. Again, we want to hear those questions from you. So as we go through the next part of the webinar, again, if you joined us a bit late, it's the chat feature that you want to be using. So the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and then put the questions through as we go. And I anticipate that the next section that we will move into will trigger some questions as well, because again, now we're going to be looking into, I guess, the viewpoints from both Gary Waite from NetSuite, but then also, from Mert at G&D as well. And I think what we'll do is, Gary, we're going to bring in yourself first, and I know you're going to hand over to Mert later on. But I think just moving on from the theme and from what Stefan has shared with us so far, I guess the question that the audience probably has and would love your views on is, what steps should MNOs and MVNOs take to successfully adopt and implement eSIM technology, as part of their digital transformation efforts, given the current state of eSIM adoption that we just looked at. So on that note, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, John. So it's interesting. I mean, eSIM is a technology. It's a technology that's been worked on for more than a decade now. It's a very complex technology to get right. And a lot of companies right across the planet have come together to come up with a specification for that technology that really does what I think it needs to do to be successful in the market. But if you're a carrier, you're faced at some point with, how do we implement eSIM, within our own infrastructure? And I've seen time and time again, even in the places that I've worked, there's always been a focus on the technology itself. So you have a look at the technical specification, you figure out what capability, what extra capability you need to add to your OSS BSS, and SMDP Plus is one such item, for example. And then what you do is you try and figure out how to do all this in a cost-effective way. And the question that really comes down from the management to the technical staff is, how can we get eSIM deployed quickly and easily without changing any of our existing processes? Because if you can do that, then you can launch eSIM, which satisfies your early adopters. And you need to satisfy your early adopters because, they're generally high revenue customers and you don't want them going to another network. But the problem with a focus on the technology, if we go on to the next slide, is that you end up with something like this. And Stefan, it sounds like you were exactly there. If we go on to the next slide, we'll see that. Where you get, a mailer in the post, but instead of a physical SIM card being as part of the package, you've got this QR code. And I understand it because you can do this quite easily within the existing processes of a carrier. It's actually relatively straightforward to do this, but really what a dreadful user experience for the customer that they get all this paperwork when the only thing they needed was that QR code, which could have been delivered in a different way. And in actual fact, the eSIM specification is written in such a way that you don't even need to use a QR code. You could use a mobile app or some other methods, even at point of sale. So this is the real danger, and I've certainly seen this time and time again with carriers, and it's something that you should seek to avoid if you can. So how do you avoid that? Well, if we go on to the next slide then, the answer to this and almost anything is always focus on the customer. What does the customer want? Think about where the customer is in their life. They're very busy. They want to get things done very quickly, ideally in 1 or 2 clicks. They've got this appetite for instant gratification, and they're already getting that with other products and services that they're buying. And so they expect the same from their experience. And I'm not even talking an eSIM experience with you as a carrier. I'm talking about their sign-up experience, their day-to-day experience being on your network. And so it's always a good place to focus on the customer. And for this webinar, I've kind of split it into 3 areas. The first is rapid service activation via a smartphone. And that's all about the first time that you ever come across the customer is to give them an experience which is one that they'll remember rather than one that they'll talk to their friends about because it was so rubbish. The second one is it's not just about their smartphone, it's about the other devices that they've got, which could be a smartwatch, a tablet, could even be a laptop or some other device. How can they add them to their existing subscription that they've got with you? And then the third area, as you said, Stefan, there will come a time where the customer wants to upgrade their device to the newest model. And how do they do that? With physical SIM, you could move it from one device to another, but with eSIM, everything's different now. So how can you provide that service to the customer? So let's just concentrate on that first one then, the rapid service activation. And if we go on to the next slide, the great thing about eSIM, of course, is that it's all digital now and things can happen really quickly. It means that you can connect your customer if you've got the right process in place in just maybe 2 or 3 minutes from them first coming across you. And that could never be done with a physical SIM card, of course. So that's a change in mindset in terms of how you interact with the customer from that very first moment. And then in your retail stores, you know, eSIM's not going to, they're not going to wipe out retail stores, but I think they have the possibility to change. And maybe there is more kiosk-driven capability within retail stores, so they don't need to be as large, or maybe you could have more of them in different places rather than just a high street. And of course, eSIM being a digital component now means that you don't need to have stock. It's all software now. All you need is the right kind of interface with the customer at those kind of retail points. One of the big things for me, and I've not seen it yet, but I hope to see this, is on the bottom left there, which is a reduction in the commissions that a carrier has to pay to certain channels. So if you think about physical SIM, you know, a small percentage of the sales were direct and a large percentage were indirect channels like supermarkets, news agents and things like that. And of course, you've got, you know, big stock keeping challenges around all this. With eSIM, all of that could disappear. And as well as having the direct approach with your customer, if you get it right, you also don't have to pay out in commissions as well. So that really goes to your bottom line. But for me, the biggest thing is on the bottom right, and that's that opportunity for a brand new online sales experience. And if we go on to the next slide, I actually asked ChatGPT to give me some examples of this, and this is what it came up with. So at the top left there, you can see a couple just watching TV in the evening, and along comes an advert. And that advert could have a QR code, which could be scanned directly from the TV to commence that onboarding journey with you as a carrier. On the right there, this is, I don't know, it could be a railway station or something where you've got adverts, a similar thing. You could have a QR code there if you wanted. And it could even be a magazine there. You see at the bottom left there, although that's one dodgy looking QR code if I've ever seen one. But for me, I quite like the idea at the bottom right there is going to where your customers are. So here they are at a festival, for example, and it's an opportunity here to let them try your network before committing commercially to it. So a try before you buy experience. It was hard to do with physical SIM because you've got distribution problems there and a lot of cost. But with eSIM, you can mitigate a lot, if not all of that. And what a perfect way to actually allow your customers to experience what your service is like for a few days or a few weeks before they commit. And a weekend away at a festival is just one example of that kind of opportunity. So it's really about thinking differently in terms of how you interact with your customers in the marketplace. Reach out to them where they are and provide them with an experience which, you know, from the very first second is just perfect. So if we go on to the next slide, it's all about that first experience. And it really, really does count because it's an online experience. They are not with you. They're not necessarily in a retail store. They could be hundreds or thousands of miles away from you. And their connection with you is a digital connection, which means as soon as they hear about your network and they have a desire to be on your network, you've got that, you know, maybe 2 or 3 minutes opportunity to show them that they've made the right decision by giving a sign-on experience, which is just perfect without any problems. And if you get that right as a carrier, that's one that they will tell their friends about how easy it was to sign up to you. And it's one that if down the line, let's say there's a problem, I don't know, a data outage or something like that, because of that first initial experience, they're likely to forgive you if there is a small problem later on. Obviously, if there's lots of problems later on, that's a different matter. But you could probably get away with, you know, one small problem because of that initial experience. That's the one that they'll remember. And that works really for you. But of course, it can work really against you if you get it wrong. Because if you get it wrong, remember, everyone's looking for instant gratification now. There's an expectation that they should be able to connect to your network and everything should just work perfectly without any problems. And if that doesn't happen for any reason, perhaps the process is a little bit clunky, perhaps it's error prone, then you're just going to lose that customer. And because they're hundreds of miles away from you, they're never going to come back. They're just going to go with your competition. And if the competition has a better sign-up experience, then they've gone. It's not like in the retail store where, you know, you can call the store manager to come out and maybe fix things by offering a special deal or something like that. It doesn't happen like that in the world that we're in now, this digitally transformed world. And so, you know, you can't just knock up a process. It really needs to be thought out and you really need to get the right people on the job. But again, if you get it right, I think that really sorts you down the line. And eSIM is just the technology, the capability, the Lego bricks, if you like, to allow you to get to that point. If we go on to the next slide then, of course, it's not just about signing up. I mean, do the services that customers want to use, and I've picked out a few here, will these services work, you know, straight out of the box without any problems? So Apple's iMessage, FaceTime, VoLTE and Wi-Fi calling. These are, you know, popular services that many people use. And of course, the customer is expecting things just to work. They don't understand the technologies or anything like that. But there is a capability behind all this that you can use to get these services to work. And if we go on to the next slide and then the one after that, it's called entitlements. So let's have a look at the architecture of entitlements then. Some of you will be familiar with the technology, but you have an entitlement server that sits in the cloud these days, and it connects via your customers' devices on the left there, right through to your OSS/BSS. And it's able to run a number of use cases, that's what we call them, which satisfy a number of services, including things like Apple iMessage, FaceTime, VoLTE, and Wi-Fi calling. And entitlements as a technology is just great at provisioning these services to make sure that all the right settings are in place, that all the authentication that needs to be done is carried out, and even if there's any interaction with the server, with the customer, that gets done as well. And it's been around as a technology for about 10 years. It was introduced by Apple really specifically for iMessage and FaceTime, but because it's so good at its job, it's been given further responsibilities over time, and I'll cover some of those later on. But let's just have a look at iMessage and FaceTime. If we go on to the next slide, then I'll just show you how it works. So there's a capability called Apple phone number registration. And if you want to use iMessage and FaceTime, you need to have a verified customer phone number. You can get this through other means. You don't need to have entitlements. You can use SMS messaging to do this, but many carriers experience problems with that. It's prone to failure. And again, you know, as soon as these things break down, you've instantly got a bad customer experience right at the start where the customer's just signed up. But with entitlements, it works like this, that the customer's device actually communicates to your entitlement server, which speaks through to your OSS/BSS to get a verified customer phone number for that device. So it happens all automatically and seamlessly, which means Apple's iMessage and FaceTime services just work. And that's the way it should be. So it's a bit like an unseen assistant that just choreographs everything behind the scenes. The customer doesn't even know anything about this, but the services just work. But you would soon know if it wasn't there. So if we go on to the next slide then, so we've covered that initial experience, and we can see how entitlements can play its part there in making sure that the customers get up and running with the services on their device. This second part then is about connecting additional devices to their same account. So I'm thinking like Apple Watch or Android device, you know, Android wearables and things like that. So let's go on to the next slide then, and we'll look at a couple of examples on that. So today, customers, it's not just about having a smartphone. It could be a smart watch or some other wearable. It could be a tablet device. It could even be a laptop. In fact, I can see in the future all sorts of consumer devices that are connected to the internet in some way could have an eSIM or an iSIM, as Stefan explained earlier on. So how do you make it easy for those extra devices to be added to a customer's account? And of course, it's not just about the devices for the customer, it's about their family as well. So how can you make it easy for the customer to connect additional devices for their family using their smartphone? And I'll show you an example of how entitlements actually makes this easy. If we go on to the next slide then, this is what happens when you provision Apple Watch onto your device. And it's almost the perfect experience. You buy your Apple Watch and you just bring it into close proximity of iPhone, and this automatically starts a dialogue, which effectively a number of steps are involved here. One is for the customer to select a plan that they would like to have on their Apple Watch, and that will result in an eSIM being downloaded to Apple Watch. There is also the connection of the two numbers, because now you've got an eSIM in iPhone, an eSIM in Apple Watch, and somehow we need to connect these two numbers. For those of you who are familiar with entitlements, you will know this as one number. And then the eSIM is downloaded into Apple Watch, and then it springs into action. And it all happens very quickly and very seamlessly, and most important of all, painlessly. And the entitlement server sits behind all of this to make everything happen at the right time and in the right order, including the dialogue with the customer, which is of course all customizable for each carrier. Let me go on to the third thing then, because I'm running out of time here. If we go on to the next slide then. And this is really important as well, because over time, of course, customers will upgrade their devices to the latest versions. And how do you do that with eSIM? Because you can't take an eSIM out of a device with your hands and put it into a new device like you can with a physical SIM card. So how do you make that work? So I'll show you one more example here on the next slide, and it's called eSIM Quick Transfer. And this comes from Apple. And I should say that there is an equivalent device transfer process for Android devices as well. And the way it works is that, of course, the device OEMs want you to be able to upgrade your device as well. That's how they keep in business, by constantly coming out with new products, which are hopefully attractive to you. And so they recognize that actually for any carrier to build their own process is quite a difficult, and it it could end up with being a clunky experience, and they really wanted to help carriers avoid that. And so with eSIM quick transfer, the device OEMs have actually created the transfer experience themselves using entitlements, and it does everything. It creates a new eSIM for the new iPhone device in this example here, or it could be a Samsung or an Oppo device. It does the SIM swap procedure. So the MISDN on the existing eSIM or physical SIM is transferred over to this new eSIM. The eSIM is downloaded into the device. Some carriers like to have terms and conditions signed at the same time. So the eSIM quick transfer allows for that. The entitlement server can interact with the customer at the right time to get that done. And all of this effectively provides instant gratification for the customer. They've got their brand new device and they just want to get transferred over to it as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. And the way eSIM quick transfer works is the transfer of the eSIM happens at the same time as all of their personal data, photos and videos and things like that. So it's, I think I've seen this operate a few times now, and it's an almost perfect experience. And it reflects strongly on you as the carrier. And of course, it removes any decision point for the customer to even think about looking at a different carrier just because they've got a new phone. And just one final piece on this, some carriers are using this same use case to upgrade their customers from a physical SIM to an eSIM on their same device. So that's three different areas which I think as a carrier, you really want to focus in on and get the right solutions for, and Entitlements does most of the work for you. So you should get yourself hold of, of an entitlement server as soon as possible if you haven't got one. But there is a challenge, and if we move on to the next slide, and this is really, I'll set the scene then for Mert to come in on how we solved these challenges that we saw with entitlement solutions. So I must have interviewed, I think, around 100 carriers across the world to figure out their experiences with entitlements, for those who had entitlements and how they were getting on with it, and for those who didn't have entitlements and what was stopping them from getting entitlements. And there was really four areas. There was complex contracting, even before you actually got a solution. The deployment was very painful. It could take maybe 6, maybe even 12 months to get that done. There was the high cost of ownership of these solutions, which is fine if you're a large carrier, but what do you do if you're a small carrier? And then there's the difficulties in adding new use cases. So eSIM quick transfer is an example of a new use case, but more new use cases are coming along, and you really don't want to be negotiating with your supplier each time. So Mert, I'd like to introduce you now to come in and maybe explain how Giesecke+Devrient has actually solved that, solved these challenges and provided a way for all carriers to get entitlements.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Yes, absolutely. So thank you for highlighting those challenges. And actually, when if we go on to the next slide, when we looked at all these challenges, we didn't just want to solve them, but we actually wanted to reimagine a way for all MNOs and MVNOs in the world to get up and started with iOS and Android entitlements in the fastest and easiest and most affordable way. And if we move on to the next slide, we actually did just that with Aeron 360ES. So we didn't just create another product, we instead solved entitlements for all carriers. So let's dig a little deeper into how we did that. And the first thing that sets Aeron 360ES apart is that it's an entitlements as a service. What that means is that it runs in the cloud and it offers high availability and performance right across the world. It's also a multi-tenant platform, so it's designed to host hundreds of carriers. And more than that, it can actually onboard any number of carriers concurrently, which is critical now with, I would say, an uptick in entitlements. And you don't need to worry about security either, because Aeron 360ES is ISO 27001 certified, and all data is encrypted in flight and at rest, and fully isolated from other tenants. So let's talk a little bit more about the onboarding process, because that too is unique. On to the next slide. So you might recognize or have even worked with some of the companies listed at the bottom of the screen here. And what's special about these companies is that they champion a highly successful developer-led self-onboarding approach. And we've brought that same approach to telecoms. So you simply sign up for a free account. You then task your developers to try out the complete solution, including implementing all the various APIs and even automatically testing that implementation within our developer portal. A developer portal that we like to say was built by developers for developers. And that means you'll know the solution is right for you before even agreeing to any commercial terms. And isn't that the way that all telecoms capabilities should be available? So we know that this is the fastest and easiest deployment model available. And some of the carriers who've already onboarded were typically able to integrate in as little as 4 weeks. And this may vary, of course, slightly depending on your technical setup and the experience of the team. But regardless, it's a far cry from the many months it typically takes to get entitlements implemented on a network. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll of course have customers both using iOS and Android devices. So any ES really needs to tick the box and it needs to support both of these ecosystems, including compliance to GSMA's TS43 specification. And this really makes Airon 360S a one-stop shop for any carrier looking to get entitlements. If we move on then to the next slide, we've also solved the problem when it comes to adding new use cases. So given the success of entitlements to date, you can expect the OEMs to add more and more use cases over time. And eSIM Quick Transfer on the iPhone is a recent prime example. So with Airon 360S, new cases are actually added automatically to the developer portal as soon as they become available and at no extra cost to the carrier. The carrier just simply needs to decide whether that use case is something they would like to implement on their network. If we move on, then this is all very good because, but none of it really works unless there's a great commercial model behind it. So and that's especially true for smaller carriers. And we've introduced a model that makes entitlements affordable to everyone. So firstly, it's a pay-as-you-grow model. And that means that it works for all sizes. There are absolutely no setup fees and there's no CapEx requirement. In fact, there are no minimum commitments. So in the unlikely event that you are not happy with the service, you can just simply stop using it. And we're that confident it's right for you. So we've designed the commercial model in this way to remove all the risk and to fit any carrier's budget. If we go on to the next slide. So Gary was talking a bit about eSIM Quick Transfer on the iPhone earlier. And even if you already have an entitlement solution today, there's now an easy way to add this use case. And we've created a new capability called multi-SIM entitlement support. So if we look again at the high-level architecture here in the next slide, your current entitlement solution carries on doing what it does today. And then the example here, the existing ES already supports Apple's phone number registration, 5G, VoLTE, and Wi-Fi calling, but it's really easy to add eSIM Quick Transfer on iPhone. And you'll see here in the next slide that you simply run Airon 360S alongside your current solution. And intelligent routing with iOS is able to split use case traffic across multiple solutions. And this is another first, another industry first. So if we look at the next slide, we already have actually nearly 100 carriers on the platform. And here are just 2 of them that have gone through the onboarding process already. So 2 Degrees is a MVNO in New Zealand and was actually one of the fastest to complete their API integration. And on the right, we have Spuzu, which is an MVNO in Europe that integrated the solution in 3 countries, Austria, Italy, and the UK. And in fact, we have such a span of carriers on the platform that our smallest carrier is in Alaska with about 500 subscribers, right up to a multinational group carrier with tens of millions of subscribers. So we really have made sure that it's really fits all sizes. And having actually interacted with every single one of these carriers on our platform, what's clear to me is that in a world of digital transformation, those carriers that can provide their customers with the best possible experience will outperform their competitors and capture a larger share of that market. And entitlements is actually the key to providing that best possible experience, especially as mobile services become more and more advanced. And in summary, then, if we look at the last slide here, when we set out, over 2 years ago to make it as easy as possible for any carrier in the world to get up and running with entitlements in the shortest possible time frame and in the most effective way, we basically built Aaron 360 ES to deliver just that. So it solves entitlements for both iOS and Android. And since a few months back, it's now available to every MNO and MVNO across the world. And if you're an Apple carrier partner and you want to add eSIM quick transfer on iPhone to your existing entitlement solution, you can achieve this easily using multi-entitlement support. And all of this is backed by a commercial model that removes all the risk and fits any budget. And the beautiful thing is that you can sign up immediately today, and it really takes less than a couple of minutes at this URL that you see across the bottom of your screen. So that's actually what I wanted to say. We've hopefully left a few minutes here for questions. So I'll put my contacts details and Gary's here in case you have any questions that don't get answered, but I'll hand over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Mert. And Gary, thank you to yourself as well. But before that, for everything that you both shared. Now, I think there's a lot that's really helpful there for us as an industry to look at when thinking about, again, those users of entitlements and helping us. And going back, Gary, to that first message you said as well about delivering for the actual customer as well on those experiences. We do have a few minutes left, and there have been some questions coming in. So let's get straight to it. I have a long list here on the screen that I'm looking at. Going in order. And I think, Stefan, we'll put the first one to yourself. It was back on, I think, the chart that you were presenting from Mark, commenting on interesting to see the eSIM enabled smartphone launches dipping in 2021. I'll let you give your thoughts on that, assuming it's pandemic related.
Yeah, of course. I think it essentially boils down to the COVID pandemic, silicon shortages, and bottlenecks in the supply chain that were happening at the time. Certainly, I remember from MWC in 2022, really, I think if COVID hadn't happened, we'd probably be talking about this and the need for entitlements and what's really how eSIM in smartphone is expanding at the pace that it is now, probably a year or two earlier if COVID hadn't happened. It's essentially it, really.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. Hope that helps answer the question as well. Now you mentioned MWC. I remembered MWC AI being on all the stands. Now that takes us into the question from Ankit, actually, which Gary, I'll feed to you because Ankit asks, can AI be used with the eSIM ecosystem to basically provide better user experiences? So is there any? The question is there any plan or current progress there that you're aware of?
So good question. I mean, AI is, I'm going to use the word infiltrating all our lives, not just our personal lives, but in our work. And even in around processes for doing things. I mean, yes, there's a place, but, I would say there's some basic stuff that you need to get up and running first. If you look at, we've seen the eSIM only iPhone from Apple. It's launched in the USA, but that will spread across the world. We don't know how quickly that will be, but we know it's coming, and so it's all about being ready. So certainly, if the carrier could look at AI aspects around this, but I think there's a hygiene factor to put in place first, and that's to get the technology up and running within your network, provide that great user experience at the outset, and then you can always improve on that later on. I wouldn't start with AI, not on this one. For other topics, yes, but not this one. Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Stay with me, Gary, because actually I'm going to put these questions to you as well, and there's a couple more that we'll try to get through. Starting with Mayor. Mayor shared one about use cases. He said, "Can you share thoughts on future use cases that we can anticipate to come?" Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we did some example use cases during the presentation, like eSIM quick transfer, Apple Watch provisioning, iMessage, FaceTime provisioning. We're very lucky that we get to see what the OEMs are working on next, and there's some really exciting ones coming along. And it just tells me that Entitlements is just so good at what it does in providing customers with a great user experience that its responsibilities are just being widened all the time. So new use cases are coming along. So whichever provider you go to get your entitlements, just make sure that that is built in to the product or service that you're buying. You don't really want to find yourself in a position where you've paid out money to get entitlements, only to find that you've got to pay more and more money every time there's a new use case. And as Mert said, with the Aeron 360 ES product, it's a service, so you get new use cases added free of charge, and that's the way it should be. Yeah. So yeah, exciting times coming with new use cases.
Yeah. No, perfect. Thank you. And I think we've got time for one more. So and there's a few that Jose asked. So we'll look to that one in a second. And very quickly, Jason, and to everyone else who's wondering as well, yes, this deck will be coming your way. Hopefully later today, worst case tomorrow morning, and the recording will follow in the days coming as well. But to Jose's question to wrap up, so Jose asked a question about entitlement server use Open Gateway with the camera APIs to communicate with MNO OSS BSS, and I think aligned to that the question, and Jose, I hope I'm correct here, was asking if, say, like a third-party app developer can leverage a standard API to initiate, I guess, some sort of eSIM action there. And again, Gary, I don't know.
Yeah, I can pick
your
that up. Yeah.
thoughts on that one.
I mean, so what the GSMA put in place in terms of a technical specification for eSIM, you could regard that as the building blocks. And with that, you can build whatever you like on top. And it's very, very flexible. And I think it's open to our own imaginations. And that's why I said, during my presentation, focus on the customer and what the experience for the customer looks like, and then track back towards the technologies that you require to fulfill those requirements. So that's the way I would do it. I wouldn't look at a particular technology and then see how could we use this. I would always look at the customer, start tracking back. But it sounds like this this technology that was specified. It was an open network. Looking through the questions here, if I can find it again, that could well come into play. But I wouldn't start there. Start with the customer experience, track back, and then just integrate the technologies that you need. Mobile apps, is a perfect opportunity to bring a great customer experience for in and around eSIM, I would say. So that's a good place to start as well.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Gary, thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, given that we're approaching the hour, we'll leave it there for now. So I guess wrapping up, want to say again, thank you to everyone who's joined us over the last hour. I hope that's been really informative for you. And as you can see, Gary and Mert, of course, left their contact details for you. I think on this topic, please do continue to reach out to them for questions, or indeed to us if you're interested in more of the market statistics that we went through. So to the speakers who came with us, so Gary, Mert, and Stefan, guys, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to have you and hear all your thoughts on this.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And again, thank you to the audience, and we hope to see you on another one of our webinars soon. So until then, thank you and bye for now.